Hello and welcome to this tier 4 Ranger Simulacrum guide. I'm going to dive in with about 5 minutes of gameplay and give you a summary of the guide, and then I'll go into much more detail about the skills, passives, and gear required for this guide. So, first things first, this content is extremely challenging, possibly the most challenging content there is in PoE 2. So just to give you a comparison, if you're talking a tier 18 map node, so let's say it's a 16 waystone that's got a corrupted node and irradiated, get a tier 18, maybe you've also got delirium on there as well. That content is easy, I would say, a walk in the park compared to tier 4 simulacrum. So very challenging, and therefore I would say that this guide is aimed at players who are, I'd say, at least 95 plus level, and you probably want a minimum of, let's say, 100 or so divs invested in your gear. If that's not you, that's fine, stick around, there's probably still a lot to learn, but I don't think you've got a realistic prospect, at least as a ranger, of getting too far, at least on tier 4. I'm not going to cover loot in any great level of detail. All you do need to know is that you get incredibly high um, crafting bases, and there are megalomaniac diamonds to be found. Uh, just a little bit more on the gameplay here. So this is now wave 5, much earlier on in the encounter. It's a lot easier, and I would say really it's a bit of a face roll until about wave 10. And wave 10 is, you'll see in a moment here, it starts to get much more challenging. Creating this build involved a lot of experimentation. So, I have tried a lot of other things, and I don't think there's, well, I'm happy to find out if someone else has managed to find something better, but I think you'll struggle to do a lot better than this particular build for this content. Wave 10 is a narrow arena. This is wave 10, arguably one of the most challenging waves because of how little space there is. You can see I just got slammed there. It did take me a lot of time to get used to completing this arena. I died a lot on it. However, it's now pretty straightforward. So I'd say of my last 30, 40 simulacrum clears, I have not died on wave 10. I've made it past wave 10 relatively easily. So now let me just talk about the build in general. So the idea is that you're spamming a Stormcaller arrow most of the time, and that is your setup. So that's not doing the real meaty damage. That is really just getting shock up on your opponents, and then the real damage is coming through from Herald of Lightning. You'll see this in much more detail when I look at the skills. The basic idea is your real damage is Herald of Lightning, and then Storm Chain Arrow also for when you're in a bit of a bad situation. You can see it happening here. That was a chain arrow, and then there's also you saw salvo of ice or cold. I can't remember the name of it. That's also another sort of get out of jail free card. But your main defense is going to be blasting enemies to pieces before they can really get to you, and being incredibly mobile. So on my Stormcaller, I've got 30% reduction in the penalty to movement speed while firing, and then I've just got vast amounts of movement speed. Okay, let's talk about skills. I'm going to skip Bowshot because that's not very important, and let's go straight into Stormcaller Arrow, which is the main attack in this build. You want to be pumping out Stormcaller as quickly, as often as possible, because it is your main enabler for damage. It doesn't do the damage directly, but all the damage essentially comes through it. And let me explain that in a moment. But first, let's look at the support gems. So I go with Inspiration. I'd say absolutely essential. This costs a lot of mana, and you want to be pumping out as many as possible. You will run out of mana if you don't use this support gem. Then we've got Mobility. Again, I would say this is non-optional. You simply will not get enough room between yourself and monsters to put out enough damage if you don't have this support gem. Then Martial Tempo, again, same theme. You get the idea. You want to be pumping this out as quickly as possible. The last two are about shocking, so your shocks do more shocks, and then finally increasing the magnitude of shocks at the expense of duration. Duration really doesn't matter. You're going to be getting so many shocks up that very few are going to expire. So that's the Stormcaller arrow. Just sort of at a very high level, how does that all sort of fit together? Well, you do a whole lot of Stormcaller arrows, they shock stuff, and then you get the Herald of Thunder buff. And how the Herald of Thunder buff works is that it means that your subsequent attacks do bolts that do loads of AoE damage. So let me just make that super clear again. Your Stormcaller does shocks. The shocks give you the Herald of Thunder buff. The buff means that your attacks, which are going to be Stormcaller and Bowshot, do loads and loads of damage with bolts. So all of your damage is going to be stacked up in support gems in your Herald of Thunder. That's where your big damage is coming from. So let me just run through these support gems. So more AoE with magnified effect. Then we've got plus 25% damage, plus 35% damage, plus 35% damage, plus 25% damage. So loads and loads of damage being multiplied up on your Herald of Thunder. I go with long shot over close combat because the bolts are random where they come down. Quite often they happen a long way away, so I think I get a more reliable damage boost using long shot instead of using close combat. You can put other things in here like heft. I've gone for these. I find these to be the greatest damage output. That's Herald of Thunder. So that really is the core of your build. You will be running out of mana quite frequently, and so you'll need to switch to Bowshot to replenish your mana. So what you can do if you're low on mana is you do a Stormcaller arrow, then a couple of Bowshots and a Stormcaller arrow, and that will mean you get your Herald up. So you're still doing a lot of damage, but you're spending very little mana. If anything, you'll be regenerating mana because you'll be killing a load of stuff. But in all of those sort of tough situations where there's vast amounts of enemies, you want to be spamming Stormcaller as quickly as possible to obliterate those enemies. Now let me just talk about the more situational attacks. Shock Train Arrow. I was tempted to say this is optional, but really it's not, because in the last 3 waves there are so many enemies that if you don't use this, you're just going to get overwhelmed. So what this does is it causes a massive chain reaction. You'll see it quite often in the gameplay sections of this video, where it just melts through all the enemies. So huge amounts of damage. If enemies have got shock on them, it chains through. So let me just quickly talk you through the support gems I have here. I've got close combat. I've got heft. I've got fork, so that there's more of them. I've got execute. So I've got what I kind of call the B tier damage. You know, if I could have these damaging, I would, but I'm already using them on Herald of Thunder, so I sort of use my B tier damage in here because this is my sort of second damage dealing ability. This lightning pen is completely redundant, so I'm just putting this gem here for safekeeping. I haven't found a better gem to put in there. So you could actually just run with 4. It would literally make no difference with this build. So you actually have a free slot there. So you could go with without a full 5 slots in this skill. Let me just talk about number of slots and skill gem levels. You do absolutely want to have all 5 slots in your Herald of Thunder and all 5 in your Stormcaller. I would say that's non-optional for this build. In terms of levels, I would say you really, really, really want to get to 21 with your Herald of Thunder. How do you do that? Well, you take a low-level Spirit skill gem, let's say a 16. You then slap a bunch of quality onto it. You then add all of the gem slots all the way up to the perfect. So you're going to spend quite a lot doing that. And then when you're done with all of that, you're going to slap on a Val Orb and hope that you get +1 from corruption. You've got about a 1 in 5 chance of getting this, so you might have to spend 5, if you're unlucky, 10 perfect jeweler orbs. So not cheap at all to get this. Once you've done that on your low-level skill gem, even after it's corrupted, you can still upgrade it to a level 20 base skill gem, which will get you to the 21. You really want to do it on a lower gem because the uncut level 20 spirit gem that you need here is alone going to set you back 6 or 7 divs. So not cheap. So absolute best case scenario, you get this done in, let's say, 8 divs. They're actually probably going to be more like 10 because perfect jewelers is more than a div. So I would say you must do this. Why is Herald of Thunder so incredibly good to have the 21? Well, there's no drawback. So because there's no mana cost, ordinarily the big drawback when you go up levels is that the mana cost goes up. Because this is a passive, there's no downside, there's no mana cost, so you really, really, really want to get this to 21. You're going to use Herald of Thunder in almost all your builds, so it's a big investment, but I'd say well worth it. You're going to find few sort of damage upgrades that are bigger than going to this. And if you're at level 18, 19, well then you're gonna see a massive damage increase if you go up to 21. In terms of the skill gem level for Stormcaller, I've not gone to 21. I have got massive amount from my game, which I'll talk about later. I've not gone to 21 because the mana cost is just too much, and you're not really wanting to do your main damage through. This is really, like I said, an enabler for your damage. You're not getting that much extra damage for going up the levels because all the damage is coming through Herald Thunder. Shock Chain, I have gone as high as possible because I like the damage, but like I said, it's situational. You probably don't need to, and you certainly don't need to go all the way to the 5th gem socket. So actually, if you want to just go to 4 gem sockets and a 21, that's very cheap to achieve because greater jeweler orbs are relatively cheap, certainly compared to perfect. So then you would do the same thing I mentioned, up to 4, then you'd slap Val orbs until you get to you get the +1 corruption, and then you upgrade the gem level to 20, which is quite cheap because it's not a spirit gem. And that's the attacks. Now let's talk about equipment. I'm going to start with the most important, most powerful pieces. So I'd start with Belt of Ingenuity. You absolutely need to have this item. It is, I would argue, the most powerful item in the whole game. Just ridiculously strong. In terms of how much you want to spend on that, I would recommend spending about 30 divs minimum. You can go all the way up to 200 if you've got the currency available, or 200 plus, but I'd say the sweet spot in terms of value for money is about 30 divs, giving you about 80% from both your rings. Next most important is Hand of Wisdom. This is also an incredibly powerful item. It's not quite like the belt in that there's no point in spending more than, I'd say, 30 divs on this because that's about as good as it gets. But it's well worth spending that money on Hand of Wisdom. You get an incredible amount of damage from that item. Then let me talk about bow and quiver. So the most important stat for your bow is obviously your DPS. So you want to go as high as possible in the DPS. You want to ideally avoid having fire and cold because that gets reduced by lightning infusion on your heralds. So perfect scenario would be that you get all of your DPS from either physical alone or even better, physical and lightning. The reason why lightning is a tiny bit better is because of the lucky passive, which means you roll twice, so you actually get slightly more value out of the lightning. But that's it's marginal. So I'd say go for the highest DPS you can afford, but weight lightning bows a little bit higher. The DPS is the #1 stat. Obviously, you're going for your additional arrow. That's essential. And then I'd say attack speed is your next most important. Attack speed obviously is already factored into your DPS, but you just get some extra utility from attacking faster. So I highly recommend, if you can, if you've got 2 bows that are the same DPS or one that's slightly lower but has higher attack speed, take the attack speed. The only other one to mention, for this build, it's highly desirable to have Mana Leech or Mana on Kill. So if you can get those 2, it is really, really good to get them. So that's your bow. Now let's talk about Quiver. Quiver is incredibly important because thanks to passives, essentially all of those stats get roughly doubled. In this build, they get slightly more than doubled, but essentially you could think of it as a doubling of those stats. So I would say, let me talk about the most important stats here. I'd say number one is your attack speed. So on this quiver, you can get up to 26% attack speed. That's a max roll. That gets doubled to 52%. So I like to think of it as about 50% attack speed is the ideal to be getting from your quiver. So that's the most important thing to get out of your quiver. I'd say the next most important is just straight up damage. So I sort of roll the increased damage with bow and projectile speed into one because they essentially do the same thing when you've got the passive. And these two add up to about 100%, which gets doubled to about 200%. So you've got an opportunity for about 200% increased damage from those two affixes. So you want to max that out as much as you can. So for this particular build, I would say filter for those as a starting point, and you'll get some pretty good value quivers. The next most desirable is projectile skills. Now, many people will tell you that this is the most desirable, most important. It is for most ranger builds where you're using, let's say, lightning arrow and Orbust orbs plus lightning rod. This build is slightly less dependent on projectile skill levels because you're getting so much damage through Herald. So you really want to have this if you can, but if you're on a budget, I mean, this quiver is going to probably set you back 150 divs. I got lucky. I bought this for about 20 divs. You're going to struggle to get a quiver as good as this unless you've got a huge amount to spend. So if you're going to cut on one thing that's going to dramatically reduce the price, it's the projectile skills. So I would say cut on that. I used to run this build without the projectile skills, and it actually worked just fine. You actually, in some ways, it's a little bit easier because you just got so much more mana because your Stormcaller is using a lot less mana, but you still got almost all the damage from Herald. So that's the one to cut on if you want to dramatically reduce the price. But ideal world, you do get that. It is a lot of extra damage, and then you just manage your mana a little bit better. Next item I'd like to talk about, let's go with the helm. I really rate the gold circlet. I think you get a huge amount of survivability from it. In fact, almost all of my uh, um, energy shield comes from this helm. It converts a percentage of your health. It doesn't convert, but you gain a percentage of your health as energy shield. You can see here almost all of my energy shield is coming from that helm. I take the helm off and I'm down to only 400. Put it back on and up to almost 1.4k energy shield. Slightly controversially, I actually rate the. You see how a percentage of this, a percentage of this of the damage taken bypasses energy shield. Now that might sound like a debuff. I actually consider that to be a benefit. And let me just explain my thinking here. So when that damage bypasses your energy shield, you see it in your health bar, and you can relatively easily heal it up. So actually, what you're really getting is almost for free. Like for free, you're spending flask charges, you're spending health flask charges to extend to multiply up your energy shield. So it's going to take longer for your energy shield to deplete. You can't actively push up your energy shield, whereas you can just pump up your health. So I see that as a benefit rather than a drawback. So I really, really highly recommend going with this helm. Then let's talk very briefly about the chest piece. You want to have at least 30 spirits so that you can run all 4 passives. Passives, obviously Herald, we've spoken about a lot, and then the 3 defensive ones, Grim Feast, Wind Dancer, and Ghost Dance. I actually run, I haven't even upgraded that to a 20, which is shocking, but Grim Feast, I'm all the way up to a 21 level gem, and same goes for my Wind Dancer. Actually, I had forgotten I hadn't upgraded that. I shall be doing that after this video. So yeah, so you want the 30 spirit. You want the 5% movement speed is fantastic. I'll talk about that in the passives, but basically I rate movement speed as the most important thing in this build, aside from it being just incredibly good fun. You want loads of life. Um, Most of your survivability in this build comes from life because, well, you're going to be pumping your flask a lot, so you need enough of a life pool that you can actually heal up damage before you just get one-shotted, but then also your life gets converted to your energy shield. You need enough energy shield to make use of Grim Feast and Ghost Dance. So I'd say you want a minimum of 1.2k energy shield, otherwise you really are not going to get the sufficient value out of those defenses, and you're going to struggle to survive. That's the chest piece. Then I think the other pieces maybe we don't really need to talk about. Obviously, you must have your 35% movement speed. You really want to have life on your boots. Everything else is just kind of a filler to reach your maximum your cap in. Whoops, let me just open up. So you must be capped in fire, lightning, cold, and chaos. You can see I've gone slightly above the 75% cap. That's not necessary. I've only done that very recently, and it doesn't really make a, well, it helps, but it doesn't make a massive difference. You don't need it. Oh, another thing that's very important now, obviously your rings are getting multiplied up by your belt, so you want to invest a fair amount in your rings. I'd say the most important things that you might specifically need, you probably want to have at least one ring that's got both dex and int. The reason for that is you need sufficient dexterity to use your bow, so you want to have at least 212, and then you need at least 205 int in order to use Grim Feast and some of your other uh, skills. So you're going to really struggle to achieve that without having at least one ring with those two stats. So you can see if I take this off, my dexterity and int kind of plummet way below what I need. So I've got at least one ring that
Nature's
does that.
fury.
Perfect world, this would be a breach ring, and you'd have 50 of those two stats, but I haven't been able to find or afford such a fantastic ring. Very good point, which you've probably all been shouting. Why are you running rarity? Yeah, so my understanding is that rarity makes no difference uh, in Simulacrum. So I'm actually just running rarity because this is just my usual gear. I haven't tailored my gear much for this for the Simulacrum. I've done a huge amount of tailoring my skills, but not my gear. So you can actually probably do a lot better than my gear for this build. So the first thing I would do if I was optimizing would be I'd cut all of the rarity, assuming that that is correct and Simulacrum is not affected by rarity. I believe that's true, but I will have to. I haven't fully verified that, but I believe it's true. So I'm running currently with this gear about 100% rarity. Great for mapping. As far as I know, it's doing nothing in Simulacrum, so that's definitely a thing to optimize. And if I was to fully optimize my gear, I would get rid of that and switch in some other budget. But yeah, so coming back to rings, um, you can get masses of value out of your rings because of ingenuity. I'd say you can see this one is doing a lot. So I've got the flat damage, I've got lightning damage. Those two getting multiplied up add up to a lot. Lightning damage looks huge. It's surprising how little it does on your sheet. I was slightly shocked, so I don't know quite what's going on there, but I was slightly surprised. If you just put in the plain ring with 30% lightning damage, it doesn't do as much as you would expect. I haven't quite figured out why that is. So this isn't, if I were that flat damage is doing a lot more than that lightning damage, believe it or not. Uh, and then, of course, your rings, you're getting a lot of your lightning resist, sorry, your elemental resists from your rings. So you've got it really is a bit of a optimization game of getting sufficient resistances, ideally chaos as well, across your rings, your chest, your boots, and your amulet. Amulet, I would say you do want to have your 3 projectile skills because it's just such it's the most valuable sort of affix on the amulet, so worth having even though projectile skills are not quite as powerful for this build as they are for other builds. The only other thing gear-wise to mention is the flasks, and I think they are very important. I do spam my flasks a lot. That's why I highly value the increased charges. Um, Something else to note, you do replenish your flasks from killing enemies even if you don't have the affix that explicitly states that. So Simulacrum, very dense, you're going to be replenishing your flasks just from the kind of innate charge recovery that comes from killing enemies, and actually very rapidly as well. So I wouldn't bother, don't bother going with the affix that says, you know, X% chance to get an extra charge every time you kill an enemy. Not necessary. You really would rather have increased charges, so you just got a much deeper flask to draw on. I think the instant heal is mandatory. You've got to absolutely take that because otherwise you will die. You won't be able to pump your health up. In terms of mana flask, this build, as I've mentioned, is incredibly mana heavy. You will you will need a very good mana flask. You can see that here I'm getting 100% extra increased mana recovery and 70% increased charges. I spent about a div on this flask. Um, well worth it. Really important that you have a strong mana flask. If you don't have this, you're going to really be struggling with mana. You can probably go with the unique mana flask. I haven't tried that yet. I don't know how good it is. It's one of the next things I'm likely to try with this build. I suspect it's incredibly powerful, but I have yet to verify that. Nevertheless, possible to do very well with just a one div flask such as this. Okay, let's talk about passives. So my general philosophy with passives is prioritize movement speed above everything, then comes attack speed, and then comes damage. Now obviously attack speed is a form of damage, but it's kind of an extra useful damage because not only do you do the damage, but you've also got an extra bit of utility because you can fire that shot and then get rolling or get running or whatever you want to do. So I consider it the most valuable type of damage. So that's how I've essentially allocated my passive nodes across the tree. So everywhere where I can pick up movement speed, I have taken movement speed. I've even taken adrenaline rush. I've instilled that on my amulet. I have 6 dual slots, and every single one of those has movement speed. So you may be wondering, well, how much movement speed do I have? Let me show you that. So I have 63% without tailwind up. Once I get tailwind up, it's up to nearly 73% after I kill something that's well over 75%. So that is a lot of movement speed, but I absolutely love movement speed. Why do I love movement speed? Well, firstly, it's very, very strong in the Simulacrum. I do believe there is some sort of break point where with movement speed and with mobility, you can be shooting but moving fast enough such that the slower enemies really struggle to even get a hit on you. So I don't know quite what that breakpoint is. Maybe it's not even a breakpoint, it just relates to the monster's speed. Nevertheless, if you get high enough movement speed, it makes all the difference in Simulacrum for me personally. Other reason is it's just loads of fun. And then maybe the most, and perhaps even how I got here in the first place with so much movement speed is it's absolutely amazing for mapping. So this build, you just have to tweak it a little bit. So you switch out Stormcaller for Lightning Arrow, and then the Eagle-Eyed amongst you will have noticed I have 2 free slots here. You can stick in Orb of Storms and Lightning Rod for killing bosses, because Lightning Arrow is not great for bosses. So you switch out, well, you switch out Stormcaller for Lightning Arrow. You get the boss killing with Orb of Storms and Lightning Rod, and then you are absolutely flying through tier 15, 16, 17, 18 maps at 75% movement speed. So loads and loads of fun. You'll be doing maps in 2-3 minutes. Maybe I'll do a separate video on what that looks like. Anyway, back to the passives. So I get as much movement speed as possible. where does that come from? Well, there's a node over here. What's it called? Step like mist. There's a node over here. There's a node. Ooh, there's plenty of movement speed nodes all over the place. Then let's talk about the next most important little cluster, which is quiver values. So you get from these 5 nodes, you get 80% value from your quivers. It is really important if you have got projectile skills on your quiver to hit the breakpoint of 100%. So once you get to 100%, then you're, instead of just getting 3 um, projectile skills from your quiver, so 2 becomes 3, you actually get up to 4, so you get the whole extra 1. So you really want to hit that breakpoint of plus 100% from quivers. You can do that from quite easily from these nodes, plus at least 2 jewels that have quiver value. So I've only got 2 jewels of quiver value, takes me above 100%. It means that I get 4 projectile skills from my quiver. Now I know a lot of endgame players like to go completely wild with quiver. It probably is worth it. Like we saw, there's just loads and loads of value on your quiver. If you can take your quiver value all the way up to 300%, you hit the next breakpoint. Or I suppose, strictly speaking, the next breakpoint would be at 150 to get 1 more skill point. Then well worth doing that. I just haven't gone down that path. I wouldn't be willing to give up my movement speed, and so I'd have to spend a small fortune on, not a small fortune, a very large fortune on quiver plus movement speed. What you can do is you can get the magic corrupted jewels, which you can then double up, and you can get ridiculous amounts of quiver. So that's probably worth doing. I haven't done that myself yet. I'll probably try that at some point. But for the time being, I haven't massively invested in my jewels. So loads of value from the quiver nodes. Other important nodes worth mentioning, obviously you do want to come over to feathered fletching, so turn your projectile speed into damage. You want to ideally come down here to Giant Slayer. This is loads and loads of extra damage against rares and uniques. Very important. Let me think about what else is worth discussion. Yes, lightning penetration is very important. So I have 60% lightning penetration from passives. So I take this cluster here, and I also take this cluster here. Now, I don't want to go into the full detail actually, because I could spend a long time just talking about lightning penetration, but the short story is that if you take these 60 lightning pen percentage worth of nodes, then you shouldn't use either lightning exposure or the 30% lightning pen support gems. Those support gems become pretty worthless in the simulacrum. And the reason for that is a little bit complicated. I will explain it separately. I also like to take the lucky node here. That adds a lot of damage. And let's see whether there's anything else that I want to talk about. There's a bit of defensive stuff going on over here. There's a bit of defensive stuff going on here, but that's mostly to get along to the extra attack speed and movement speed, and I mostly come through here where we get quite a lot of evasion in order to get to a bunch of elemental damage over here. There is the 1% attack speed per 15 dexterity, and there's also attack speed per accuracy. So lots and lots of attack speed. Like I said, that's one of the most important things. Anything else worthy of note? No, I think that's probably... Oh, maybe you're curious as to where have gone with the stats on my jewels. So like I said, I prioritized movement speed, and then I just went for whatever looked yummy. I'd say that I don't even use the mark skill, so that's completely worthless. I do think the damage against rares and uniques is really strong. It doesn't show in your stats sheet, but I do like to have that, so I've got that in quite a few uh, quite a few of these. So that one, let's have a look here. This one has also got the damage against rare and uniques. Herald damage is nice as well. I mean, to be fair, I've probably not even spent a div on some of these. I had some of these jewels knocking around for a long time. I need to optimize them at some point. The valuable ones, the ones that did set me back, were the 2 quiver ones, because everyone wants to go wild with quivers. So there's a 14% quiver with 2 movement speed. Spent quite a lot on that, and I spent quite a lot on this one with movement speed, attack speed, and quiver value. That's probably my most expensive jewel. But generally, I haven't gone too crazy with jewels. So yeah, that'll be passives. Okay, let's end on a few wave 15 clears. I like to start by getting my Tailwind up. I'm then going to spam Stormcaller. I'm going to start popping my mana flask quite early on. I want to keep that high enough so that I can use my Shock Chain when necessary. Here is a Mana Legion mob. I need to get away from him as quickly as possible. He's closing in on me. I can take a hit. Ouch. I need to get some room, get some space between me and him. There's a nice Shock Chain. He's coming in. I'm going to Freezing Salvo, get away from him. He's still alive, still chasing me, needs to get away. 2 bosses come in, this is when it starts to get really, really hectic. Really needs to take down that Mana Leecher. He is now down. You can see that Omniphoba has dropped to half health. I haven't even been focusing him yet. Most of the mobs are now cleaned up, so it really is just a case of taking the 2 bosses. However, Omniphoba is still dangerous. I do need to take him down as soon as possible. He's nearly within cull range now. I'm going to focus him down, finish him, and then just a case of finishing off Kosis. So can breathe a sigh of relief. It's pretty much a free kill after when it's just Kosis. I used to kill him with Orb of Storms and Lightning Rod, which can be a little bit quicker, but I don't do that anymore because it is a little bit more dangerous. So you can just take a hit of 5 fireballs in the face if you're standing next to him. Whereas, we've got a diamond. Yummy. I will take that. Okay, let me talk you through profitability. So I successfully complete about 90% of Simulacrum runs. 1 in 10 I might die on wave 14 or 15. It's frustrating, but it doesn't really detract from how profitable it is. Over my last 30 runs, I've had about 5 or 6 diamonds drop. I've had 0 flasks, which is disappointing, but they are dropping in value because they drop in lower levels of the Simulacrum as well. But the bulk of my profit has been from getting the higher item level bases and crafting them through. So I've probably made 60 or so divs worth of, that's actual sales that have gone through, and I've probably got another 20 divs worth sitting around in my stash that still need to be sold. So a fair bit of profit to be made from crafting up those items. You don't want to spend too long doing it because you will miss out on runs. So I aim for a 15-minute run and then 10 minutes of processing, or maximum of 10 minutes processing the loot that I've farmed in that run. Which you need to come up with some sort of mechanism for doing that quickly, because if you just craft everything you pick up, you're going to be spending ages. So yeah, you do need to kind of think that through. Let's end on one more wave 15 clear. I'm going to start by spamming out Stormcaller and pumping my mana flask, make sure I've got enough mana so that I can use a shock chain if I start to get surrounded. Going very smoothly so far. Going to keep pumping Stormcaller. Bosses should be coming in relatively soon, so I need to be careful. I need to find some room. I roll back for a bit of extra space. Bosses come in, and there are a huge number of monsters closing in on me. I need to use my shock chain. Need to get away. Okay, looking a bit clearer now. A huge number of monsters closing in on me. I'm in trouble. Need to find room. Mayday. Roll out. Okay, I'm alive. Omniphoba is low. I can finish him off. He gets cold, and we're just left with Kosis. We can breathe a sigh of relief. The rest should be pretty straightforward. So when you're killing off Kosis, just remember you do want to be moving adjacent. Sorry, not adjacent. You want to be moving at a tangent to him. So think of it like moving a big circle around him to avoid taking fireballs to the face. Though he's just going to go down here. And there we have it. Another successful clear.